The smell of ozone and recycled air filled the testing chamber as 53 cadets from across the galaxy settled into their assigned seats. Each desk bore the same standard equipment: a datapad, stylus, and one military-grade combination lock that gleamed under the artificial lighting. The lock looked innocent enough, but every cadet knew these devices were used to test problem-solving abilities under pressure. Alex rubbed his palms against his uniform pants and glanced around the room. To his left sat Kira, whose blue-tinted skin marked her as one of the Nexari. Her fingertips sparked with tiny electrical discharges whenever she was nervous, and right now they were practically glowing. Behind him, Dex from the warrior planet. Thuvan sat perfectly still, his enhanced muscles coiled with the patience his people were famous for. Near the front, Vel's amphibious features glistened as water cycled through her breathing apparatus, her large eyes already calculating probability chains in the way only hydrons could manage. Then there was Alex. Human. Average height? Average. Build. No visible modifications or special abilities. Half the class probably wondered why he was even here. The Galactic Defense Academy accepted only the best candidates from each species, and humans were still considered newcomers to the galactic community. Most species had been exploring space for millennia before humans even invented the wheel. Commander. Wraith entered the chamber with measured steps, his towering frame casting shadows across the desks. The Corvan officer's silicon-based physiology meant that crystal formations jutted from his shoulders and arms, catching the light and scattering rainbow patterns across the walls. His compound eyes could process visual information faster than most organic species could think, and his reputation for being impossible to impress was legendary throughout the Academy. "Today marks the beginning of your advanced tactical assessment," Wraith announced, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones typical of his species. "Each lock contains a data chip with your first real scenario. These are not training exercises. These are actual situations that fleet officers have encountered in the field." Alex felt his heartbeat quicken slightly. Real scenarios meant real consequences, even in training. Cadets who failed these assessments could find themselves reassigned to supply divisions or administrative roles instead of the command tracks they had worked years to reach. "The average time for opening these locks is 47 minutes for the most promising students," Wraith continued, moving between the rows of desks. "Some of you may require longer. The important factor is not speed, but methodology. We want to see how you approach problems when standard solutions may not apply." The commander paused at the front of the room, his crystalline protrusions shifting slightly as he surveyed the assembled students. "You may begin." Around the room, cadets immediately began their approaches. Kira placed her hands on her lock and closed her eyes, electrical fields dancing across her fingertips as she attempted to sense the electronic patterns within the mechanism. The soft blue glow of her bioelectric ability cast eerie shadows on her face as she concentrated. Dex lifted his lock with careful precision, turning it over to examine every surface with the methodical thoroughness his warrior culture prized. His enhanced vision could detect microscopic details that might give clues to the internal mechanism, and his patient nature meant he would spend hours if necessary to understand every aspect of the device. Vel's approach was different entirely. She activated her personal computing device and began running probability calculations, her species' mathematical abilities allowing her to process thousands of potential combinations simultaneously. Her gills fluttered rapidly as her brain worked through the complex equations. Alex picked up his lock and felt its weight in his hands. The metal was warm from sitting under the lights, and the surface was perfectly smooth except for the combination dial. He turned it over once, noting the small markings that indicated it was military grade, then held it up to his ear and gave the dial a gentle rotation. Click. The sound was so quiet that Alex almost missed it himself, but in the silent concentration of the testing chamber, it might as well have been a thunderclap. Commander Wraith's head snapped around so fast that his crystal formations clinked against each other, creating a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Alex set the opened lock on his desk and picked up the data chip that had been inside. He inserted it into his reader and began examining the tactical scenario while the rest of the class stared at him in stunned silence. "Cadet Alex," Commander Wraith said slowly, his compound eyes focusing on the human with laser-like intensity. "Please explain your methodology." Alex looked up from his reader, genuinely puzzled by the attention. "The lock." I listened to the mechanism. Each number has a slightly different sound when the tumbler falls into the correct position. Also, whoever programmed these used a date-based sequence following the Corvin calendar system. Once I identified the pattern in the first 3 digits, the rest was just mathematical progression. Wraith's crystal formations shifted into a configuration that Alex recognized as confusion. In Corvin body language, it was equivalent to a human scratching their head. That should not be possible. These locks are specifically designed to prevent acoustic analysis. Well, yes, sir. They prevent electronic acoustic analysis, Alex agreed. But human hearing works differently than most electronic sensors. We evolved as hunters who had to track prey by sound. We're naturally good at detecting subtle audio patterns that machines might miss. Around the room, other cadets had stopped working on their own locks to listen to the exchange. Kira's electrical discharge had increased, creating tiny sparks that danced between her fingers. Dex had set down his lock entirely, his warrior instincts telling him that something significant was happening. Wraith moved to his supply cabinet and retrieved another lock, this one bearing different security markings. Perhaps that device was defective. Try this one. Alex accepted the new lock with a slight smile. This time he didn't even bother lifting it to his ear. Instead, he began turning the dial with quick, confident movements, his fingers seeming to dance across the numbers. Within 2 minutes, the second lock clicked open. Standard fleet encryption protocols use prime number sequences as their base algorithm, Alex explained casually. But the programming assumes the user thinks in base 8 mathematics like most galactic species. Humans use base 10. When you approach the sequence from a human mathematical perspective, the pattern becomes pretty obvious. The silence in the A room was now complete. Even the soft humming of the environmental systems seemed loud in comparison to the absolute stillness of 52 stunned cadets and one very confused instructor. Commander Wraith's compound eyes studied Alex with an intensity that made the human cadet slightly uncomfortable. In over 800 years of training students at the academy, Wraith had seen prodigies before. He had witnessed exceptional abilities, breakthrough moments, and displays of natural talent that defied easy explanation. But this was different. Alex hadn't used enhanced senses, advanced technology, or superior processing power. He had simply looked at the problem from an angle that nobody else in the room had considered. More troubling was how natural it seemed to him, as if he was genuinely surprised that others found the task difficult. "Class dismissed," Wraith announced suddenly. "All cadets except Alex report to standard simulation chambers for tactical exercises. Alex, remain here." As the other students filed out, casting curious and sometimes envious glances over their shoulders, Commander Wraith approached Alex's desk. The human was reading through his tactical scenario with the same casual efficiency he had displayed, with the locks. "Tell me, Alex," Wraith said, his voice dropping to a more conversational tone, "how long have humans been solving problems this way?" Alex considered the question seriously, setting down his data reader. "Always, I suppose. We had to learn to adapt quickly on Earth. If you couldn't figure out how to hunt something bigger than you or find water during a drought or stay warm when the weather changed unexpectedly, you died. We got good at finding solutions with whatever resources were available." Wraith nodded slowly. Every species had faced survival challenges during their evolution, but most had developed specific advantages to overcome them. enhanced strength, telepathic abilities, environmental resistances, or extended lifespans that allowed for accumulated wisdom. Humans seem to have developed something much more subtle, but potentially more powerful: pure adaptability. I'm recommending you for advanced placement, Wraith said finally. Your performance on the tactical scenarios will determine which specialization track, but I suspect you won't be staying with this introductory class much longer. Alex nodded respectfully. Thank you, sir. Should I report to the regular simulation schedule tomorrow? No, Wraith replied, his crystal formations shifting into what Alex had learned to recognize as deep thought. Report to my office at 0800 hours tomorrow. I have some colleagues who need to meet you. After Alex gathered his materials and left, Commander Wraith remained alone in the testing chamber, staring at the two opened locks on the desk. In his long career, he had encountered many exceptional students, but Alex represented something entirely unprecedented. The human hadn't just solved the problems faster than expected, he had approached them from directions that hadn't occurred to anyone else in the room, and he had done it so naturally, so instinctively, that he seemed genuinely puzzled by the difficulty others experienced. Wraith activated his communication terminal and composed a priority message to Fleet Command. The subject line was simple but significant. Recommend immediate evaluation. Potential strategic asset. For the first time in decades, Commander Wraith found himself genuinely curious about how a student would perform in truly advanced scenarios. More than curious, he was beginning to suspect that the galaxy's understanding of human capabilities was not just incomplete, but dangerously underestimated. As he secured the testing chamber and prepared for his next class, one thought dominated Wraith's mind. If this human could solve standard military problems with such ease, what might he accomplish when faced with challenges that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds? The answer to that question would come sooner than anyone expected. 3 levels below the main academy grounds, in a section that didn't appear on any student maps, Alex followed Commander Wraith through corridors that seemed designed to discourage casual exploration. The walls here were thicker, reinforced with materials that suggested this area was built to withstand serious combat damage. Security scanners tracked their movement every few meters, and the air itself felt heavier somehow, as if charged with barely contained energy. Before we proceed, Wraith said as they approached a door marked only with fleet symbols Alex didn't recognize, you should understand what you're about to see. The Strategic Assessment Division deals with problems that have resisted conventional solutions. We gather specialists from across the galaxy to work on situations that standard military doctrine cannot address. The door slid open to reveal a chamber unlike anything Alex had seen before. The room was circular, dominated by the most sophisticated holographic system he could imagine. 3-dimensional star maps floated in the air, showing real-time data from across the galaxy. Around the room's edge stood figures that made Alex's exotic classmates look ordinary by comparison. A being of pure crystalline energy flickered in and out of visible reality, existing partially in dimensions Alex couldn't perceive. 6 identical figures stood in perfect synchronization, their movements so coordinated that they were obviously components of a single collective consciousness. Most unsettling was a tall, thin figure whose outline seemed to blur slightly, as if Alex was seeing several versions of the same person occupying the same space simultaneously. At the center of the chamber stood Admiral Knox, whose reputation Alex knew even as a first-year cadet. The Xantharian's 4 arms moved independently across multiple control surfaces, her enhanced neural pathways processing information streams that would overwhelm most species. Her silver-scaled skin reflected the holographic displays, creating patterns of light that shifted with her movements. Cadet Alex, Admiral Knox said without looking up from her work. Commander Wraith's preliminary report was interesting. However, solving training locks hardly qualifies someone for strategic assessment. We deal with actual crises here, situations that have challenged our finest minds for months. The holographic display shifted, showing a three-dimensional map of the Outer Rim territories. Red zones pulsed throughout the display like infected wounds, each one representing a human colony that had been attacked and destroyed. The pattern of destruction was methodical, deliberate, and somehow wrong in a way that made Alex's stomach clench with unease. The Devourers, Admiral Knox continued, her tone carrying the weight of months of frustration. 8 months ago, they began systematically destroying human settlements along the Outer Rim. Every tactical response we've attempted has been countered before implementation. Every strategy we've developed has been anticipated and defeated. Our most advanced tactical computers have been consistently outmaneuvered. Alex studied the display, his eyes tracking the pattern of attacks and the fleet's response positions. The more he looked, the more obvious it became that something was fundamentally wrong with their approach. Have you tried being unpredictable? The room fell silent so completely that Alex could hear the soft humming of the holographic projectors. The 6-person collective turned their synchronized attention toward him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The temporal being's multiple outlines seemed to converge, as if all possible versions of him were suddenly focusing on this single moment. "Explain," Admiral Knox said sharply, all 4 of her hands pausing in their data manipulation. Alex moved closer to the display, studying the fleet's response patterns in detail. Each attack was met with textbook military responses, logical deployments, efficient resource allocation, and strategic positioning based on established galactic doctrine. You're fighting like a galactic military should fight. Every response follows standard procedures. Everything is logical, efficient, and completely predictable. That is how military forces are supposed to operate. The collective consciousness spoke in perfect unison, their voices creating an eerie harmony. "We have analyzed every known tactical framework. There are no patterns we have not considered." "Maybe that's the problem," Alex replied, manipulating the holographic controls to highlight specific attack patterns. "You're looking for patterns that make sense. But look at these target selections. They're not hitting your most strategic colonies or your strongest defensive positions. They're choosing targets that hurt in ways that don't show up on tactical assessments." Alex traced several attack vectors with his finger, the holographic display responding to his movements. This colony was the birthplace of Admiral Chen, one of your most famous commanders. This settlement was a cultural center with minimal military value. This one housed the largest human memorial cemetery in the Outer Rim. None of these targets made tactical sense, but they all had enormous psychological impact. Admiral Knox's 4 arms stilled completely as she processed this observation. "You're suggesting they're targeting human morale rather than strategic assets. I'm suggesting they understand something about human psychology that your tactical computers don't," Alex said. "Humans don't fight just for strategic advantages. We fight for things that don't make logical sense: pride, honor, revenge, the memory of the dead. When someone attacks those things, we don't respond logically either." The crystalline being's form solidified slightly as it focused on Alex's words. "Emotional decision-making has been proven statistically inferior to logical analysis in military situations." Alex turned to face the assembled specialists, noting that not one of them looked entirely human. "How many of you have studied actual human military history?" The question was met with silence that told Alex everything he needed to know. On Earth, we had a military philosopher named Sun Tzu who taught that supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. But we also had generals who won battles they should have lost because they convinced their soldiers that surrender wasn't an option. We've won wars by being too stubborn to quit and lost them by being too logical to keep fighting when we should have. Alex returned to the holographic display, manipulating the timeline to show the progression of devourer attacks. They're betting that humans will respond predictably to psychological warfare. They attack something important to us, we reinforce other important targets, they attack those, we spread ourselves thinner, and eventually we collapse. But what if we broke the pattern? How? Admiral Knox asked, though Alex could tell from her tone that she was beginning to understand. We abandon the outer rim entirely, Alex said simply. Pull every human colony back to the mid-rim defensive line. Make it look like we're retreating in panic. The temporal being's multiple outlines seem to fracture with surprise. That would abandon millions of colonists and countless strategic resources. No, Alex corrected. It would look like we're abandoning them. The colonists evacuate to safety, but we leave behind skeleton crews with automated systems to maintain the illusion of normal activity. When the devourers arrive expecting demoralized, defenseless colonies, they find prepared ambush positions. And if they detect the deception? The collective asked. Alex smiled grimly. Then we spring the real trap. See, every human colony isn't just a settlement. It's a community. Everyone out there has family, friends, personal connections to those places. When the devourers attack what looks like abandoned colonies and realize they've been fighting automated defenses, they'll think they've been tactically outmaneuvered. But they won't realize, Admiral Knox said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her voice, that they've just given every human in the fleet a personal reason to hunt them down. Exactly. You've been trying to fight them like a galactic military fighting an external threat. But humans don't work that way. When someone destroys our homes, we don't calculate optimal response strategies. We get angry, and angry humans fight very differently than logical ones. The chamber fell quiet as the assembled specialists processed Alex's proposal. From a galactic military perspective, it violated numerous established principles. It was strategically risky, tactically unsound, and based on emotional responses, rather than logical analysis. It was everything their training told them to avoid. It was also completely unlike anything the Devourers would expect. Commander Wraith stepped forward. Admiral, I recommend we run comprehensive simulations on this proposal. Already initiating, Admiral Knox replied, her forearms dancing across control surfaces with renewed purpose. Preliminary models show... She paused, her expression shifting to one of genuine surprise. Preliminary models show a 78% probability of strategic success. The crystalline being's form flickered between dimensions. How is this possible? The plan violates fundamental tactical principles. That's exactly why it might work, Alex explained. The Devourers have been studying and countering fundamental tactical principles for 8 months. Maybe it's time to try something that isn't fundamental. Admiral Knox's arms continued their complex dance across the control interfaces. Alex, you're hereby transferred to Strategic Assessment Division pending approval of this operation. Wraith, I want complete psychological profiles of human combat behavior throughout their species' recorded history, and someone establish a direct communication link with Fleet Command immediately. As the specialists dispersed to begin implementation planning, Admiral Knox approached Alex privately. Her silver scales reflected the shifting light of the holographic displays, creating patterns that seemed to mirror her complex thoughts. Tell me honestly, she said quietly, how confident are you that this approach will succeed? Alex considered the question with the same seriousness he had given to the combination locks. Confident that it will work? Not very. But I'm absolutely certain that continuing to do what we've been doing won't work. Sometimes the best solution isn't the smartest one. It's just the one nobody else would think to try. Admiral Knox nodded slowly, her forearms moving in a gesture that indicated deep respect in Xantharian culture. In my experience, the most dangerous enemies are those who think in ways you cannot predict. Perhaps it's time we learn to think in ways they cannot predict either. As Alex was escorted to his new quarters in the Strategic Division, he reflected on how quickly his life had changed. 2 days ago, he was a first-year cadet struggling to prove he belonged at the academy. Now he was part of a team tasked with saving human colonies from an enemy that had outthought the galaxy's finest military minds. The responsibility should have been overwhelming, but instead Alex felt something he sensed the galaxy hadn't experienced in months: genuine hope. Not because his plan would definitely work, but because for the first time since the attacks began, they were going to try something the enemy wouldn't see coming. And in Alex's experience, surprise was often more valuable than superior firepower, advanced technology, or even superior intelligence. Sometimes being unpredictable was the greatest advantage of all. The evacuation ships moved through space like a massive migration, their holds packed with civilians from 47 outer rim colonies. To any observer, it looked exactly like what the Devourers would expect: a panicked retreat as humans abandoned their frontier settlements in the face of overwhelming force. The deception was so complete that even some fleet officers believed they were witnessing a genuine strategic withdrawal. Alex stood in the war room aboard the command vessel Harmony, watching the real-time status displays that told a different story. Each supposedly abandoned colony still showed signs of normal activity: agricultural operations continuing their harvest cycles, mining equipment extracting resources on schedule, communication traffic flowing between settlements and the core worlds. The illusion was maintained by sophisticated artificial intelligence systems and small teams of volunteers who had specifically requested to remain behind. Devourer reconnaissance forces have entered the Kepler sector, reported Lieutenant Ray, the human communications specialist who had transferred to Alex's unit after hearing about the operation. They're maintaining their standard approach pattern: long-range scanning followed by systematic movement toward primary population centers. Admiral Knox studied the tactical displays from her position at the Central Command console, her arms coordinating information streams from multiple sectors simultaneously. Estimated time until they reach the first prepared position? 16 hours at current velocity, Alex replied, tracking the enemy formation's progress. They're being more cautious than usual. The withdrawal seems to have made them suspicious. Or more confident, Commander Wraith added, his crystal formations interfacing directly with the ship's data networks in ways that would have been impossible for organic species. They may interpret strategic withdrawal as evidence that their psychological warfare has been successful. Alex nodded, though something about the enemy's approach pattern bothered him. The key is what happens after they spring the first trap. If we're right about their psychology, they'll escalate their attacks rather than retreat. If we're wrong, he didn't need to complete the thought. If they were wrong, the fleet would have voluntarily abandoned their primary defensive line and drawn the Devourer's attention to more valuable targets deeper in human space. The waiting was always the hardest part of any military operation. Alex had studied enough historical battles to understand that the period between committing to a strategy and learning whether it would succeed was when even experienced commanders questioned their decisions. But he had also learned something that seemed to distinguish humans from their galactic neighbors. Sometimes uncertainty could be turned into an advantage. "Sir," Lieutenant Ray called from her station, "we're receiving a coded transmission from Colony 7 Alpha. Devourer forces have arrived and are taking up attack positions." The main display shifted to show sensor data from the colony's hidden monitoring systems. The Devourer fleet approached the settlement with their characteristic display of overwhelming force. Massive vessels arranged in formations designed to terrorize as much as destroy. Their previous attacks had followed a predictable sequence: demonstrate superior firepower, offer terms of surrender that would never be honored, then systematically annihilate everything regardless of the response. "They're broadcasting their standard intimidation message," Ray reported. "Colony is responding according to protocol." What the Devourers didn't know was that only 15 humans remained in the entire settlement, all fleet volunteers who had specifically asked for this assignment. They weren't just maintaining the illusion of a normal colony. They were responding exactly as the Devourers expected humans to respond when faced with impossible odds. With defiance that appeared suicidal to any logical analysis. Colony is rejecting surrender terms, Ray continued. Devourers are beginning their attack sequence. Alex watched the tactical display with grim concentration. The colony's defensive systems engaged exactly as they would in a real human settlement. Desperately, courageously, and with complete disregard for mathematical probability. Civilian weapon platforms targeted enemy ships threatening the community center rather than the most dangerous military vessels. Emergency protocols prioritized protecting cultural artifacts over strategic personnel. It was a perfect simulation of human irrationality under pressure. Direct hit on the main residential complex, Ray announced. Casualties reported. Alex felt his stomach tighten. The casualties were real, even though the colony was largely empty. The volunteers knew the risks when they accepted the mission, but that didn't make their sacrifice any easier to witness. Devourer ground forces are landing, Ray reported. They're taking their time with the occupation. Seems like they're savoring the victory. That behavior was exactly what Alex had predicted. The Devourers weren't just trying to win military victories. They were attempting to break human morale through systematic psychological torture. They wanted humans to feel helpless, to view resistance as pointless. Second attack wave incoming, Ray said. Colony 7 Alpha is transmitting final distress signals. The display showed Devourer ground forces methodically destroying everything that represented human culture and achievement in the settlement. They weren't simply conquering territory. They were attempting to erase human identity itself. Now, Alex said quietly. Admiral Knox activated the prepared signal array. Throughout the sector, concealed fleet forces that had been waiting in hidden positions began their coordinated response. But this wasn't the logical textbook counterattack the Devourers had been trained to expect from galactic military forces. Every human in the fleet had been watching the live feeds from Colony 7 Alpha. They had seen their people die defending their homes against impossible odds. They had witnessed the Devourers systematically destroying everything humans had built on the frontier worlds, and now they were absolutely furious. Fleet units are engaging enemy forces, Ray reported, though her professional composure was beginning to crack. On her displays, she could see human vessels abandoning standard tactical formations and attacking the Devourer fleet with an intensity that surprised even Alex. Admiral, Commander Wraith said urgently, our forces are breaking formation. They're not following the established tactical plan. Alex had expected this development. Let them. But our ships are attacking individually rather than maintaining coordinated battle groups. This violates fundamental principles of space combat doctrine. I know, Alex replied calmly, and the Devourers know that too. They're expecting coordinated resistance from a disciplined galactic military force. What they're getting instead is 47 separate revenge missions. The tactical display showed a battle unlike anything in recorded galactic military history. Human ships attacked with reckless intensity that defied logical analysis, focusing their weapons not on the most tactically significant targets, but on the specific vessels that had participated in destroying their colonies. Ship captains ignored, damage to their own craft while pursuing enemy forces with single-minded determination that bordered on obsession. From a military science perspective, it was completely unprofessional. It violated established tactical doctrine. It ignored strategic priorities in favor of emotional responses. It was also devastatingly effective. Devourer forces are withdrawing from Colony 7 Alpha, Ray reported with barely controlled excitement. They appear confused by our response. Patterns. Enemy fleet coordination is breaking down. Alex nodded grimly. They built their entire strategy around predicting human behavior, but they were predicting logical human behavior. They never planned for angry human behavior. The battle continued for another 4 hours, but the outcome became clear within the first 20 minutes. The Devourers had expected to face a demoralized enemy following standard galactic military retreat procedures. Instead, they encountered opponents who ignored tactical disadvantages, ignored personal safety, and ignored military protocol in pursuit of personal vengeance against the forces that had destroyed their homes. Final Devourer vessel has jumped. To hyperspace, Ray announced. Sector 7 is completely secure. We're receiving surrender requests from enemy ground forces still on the colony surface. The war room erupted in celebration, but Alex remained focused on the strategic implications. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Admiral, he said quietly, cutting through the celebration, we need to prepare for their next move immediately. This victory will fundamentally change how they approach us. Admiral Knox's celebration gestures paused as she considered his words. Explain your assessment. They'll adapt to our new tactics, Alex said simply. The Devourers are intelligent. They learned to counter standard galactic military doctrine in 8 months. Now they'll begin developing counters for human emotional responses. So we adapt our approach as well, Commander Wraith suggested, his crystal formations shifting into patterns that indicated strategic thinking. Alex shook his head. We do something better than adapting. We do what humans excel at when someone tries to outthink us. Which is? Alex smiled with grim determination. We stop trying to be clever and start trying to win. Admiral Knox studied the tactical display showing their sector victory, then looked at Alex with new understanding. You're not just proposing that we think like humans instead of like a galactic military. You're proposing that we fight like humans. The galaxy has spent decades trying to make humans fight according to established galactic doctrine, Alex replied. Maybe it's time the rest of the galaxy learned what happens when humans fight like humans. As status reports continued flowing in from across the liberated sector, one thing became abundantly clear to everyone in the war room. The Devourers had made a critical miscalculation. They had spent months learning to predict and counter logical, disciplined responses from galactic military forces, but they had never prepared to fight enemies who cared more about revenge than victory, more about honor than survival, and more about protecting their people than following tactical doctrine. For the first time in 8 months, the Devourers had encountered something they weren't prepared for. Humans fighting exactly like humans instead of trying to fight like everyone else. And for Alex, watching the celebration around him while planning the next phase of operations, one thought dominated his mind. This was only the beginning. The circular chamber on Central Station housed representatives from every major civilization in known space, many of whom were seeing a human for the first time in their lives. Alex stood at the center of the amphitheater, feeling remarkably small among beings who represented cultures that had been exploring the galaxy since before Earth's sun had finished forming. The weight of their attention was almost physical, pressing down on him like the atmosphere of a heavy-gravity world. The holographic display above his head showed the dramatic transformation of the tactical situation over the past 6 weeks. Where red zones had once indicated steadily expanding Devourer territory, the map now showed a complex pattern of contested regions. Several sectors glowed blue, marking territories the Devourers had abandoned entirely after encountering human resistance they couldn't predict or counter. Counselor Vorth of the Centauri Republic spoke first, his 3-chambered cardiovascular system beating in rhythms that indicated reluctant respect. The human tactical innovations have proven unexpectedly effective. However, we must consider the broader implications of encouraging such unorthodox approaches to warfare. Alex had been briefed on the various species represented in the council, but seeing them in person was still overwhelming. Counselor Vorth's tall, graceful form moved with the fluid precision of a species that had evolved in low gravity. His pale blue skin bore the intricate scarification patterns that marked his rank in Centauri society, and his large, dark eyes reflected an intelligence that had been refined over millions of years of civilization. "Honored counselors," Alex began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic design. "Our recent successes have revealed something important about the Devourer strategy that we missed during 8 months of conventional analysis." The display shifted to show communication intercepts and behavioral patterns gathered since the first human victory. The Devourers aren't simply trying to conquer territory or eliminate resistance. They're conducting systematic psychological research on how different species respond to various forms of pressure and intimidation. Murmurs rippled through the assembly in dozens of different languages and communication methods. Some counselors exchanged electromagnetic pulses, others communicated through color changes in their skin, and a few species shared information through direct neural links that bypassed verbal communication entirely. Counselor Zeth of the Machine Collective responded through her mechanical interface, her artificial voice carrying harmonics that indicated deep processing of the information. Clarify the nature of this research and its implications for galactic security. Alex manipulated the holographic controls to highlight specific attack patterns across the past 2 years. Look at their target selection preferences. They've consistently avoided engaging certain types of species. The silicon-based life forms like the Corvin, energy beings such as the ethereal planes inhabitants, and collective consciousness races like yourselves. They've focused almost exclusively on individualistic species that demonstrate emotional responses to psychological pressure. High Consul Theron of the Telepathic Dominion leaned forward, his mental emanations carefully controlled to avoid influencing others in the chamber. "You believe they are studying our psychological responses rather than simply attempting to defeat us militarily." "I believe they've been using us as test subjects," Alex replied, causing a stir throughout the chamber that manifested in flashing lights, color changes, and harmonic frequencies that created a symphony of alien concern. Each attack was designed to provoke specific responses from different species. They've been building a comprehensive database of how galactic civilizations react to various types of psychological warfare. The display now showed intelligence gathered from captured Devourer technology, data that had been extracted at great cost by fleet special operations teams. The information was fragmentary and difficult to interpret, but the implications were disturbing enough to have prompted this emergency council session. Analysis of their data storage systems indicates that the Devourers are not native to this galaxy, Alex continued. They're advanced scouts for something much larger. The attacks we've been fighting are preparation for a full-scale invasion by their main force. The chamber fell completely silent. Representatives who had been alive for centuries or millennia, who had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations, sat in stunned contemplation of the implications. "The main Devourer invasion force is still traveling through intergalactic space," Alex explained. "These preliminary attacks have been gathering intelligence about how local species think, fight, and can be defeated. By the time their main force arrives, they expect to have detailed psychological profiles and tactical counters for every major civilization in the galaxy." Counselor Vorth's skin shifted to a deeper blue shade that indicated alarm in his species. "How long before this main invasion force reaches our galaxy?" "Unknown, but our recent tactical successes may have forced them to accelerate their timeline," Alex admitted. "By proving that their predictions about human behavior were incomplete, we've probably invalidated months of their research data. They'll need to gather new information or risk arriving unprepared." High Consul Theron's mental emanations grew stronger as he processed the implications. "This explains their rapid adaptation to your unconventional tactics. They are not simply trying to win battles. They are attempting to complete their psychological studies before their reinforcements arrive." Alex nodded. "Every engagement teaches them something new about how we think and react. If we fight predictably, they develop counters. If we fight unpredictably, they study our unpredictability and learn to predict that too. Then we face an impossible situation," declared Counselor Zeth, her mechanical form shifting into configurations that indicated complex analysis. If we use conventional tactics, they counter them. If we use unconventional tactics, they study and eventually counter those as well. Not necessarily, Alex said, manipulating the display to show a series of theoretical tactical scenarios that had taken the Strategic Assessment Division weeks to develop. There's a third option. We stop fighting as individual species trying to coordinate with each other and start fighting as one unified force that thinks in ways no single species could predict. The suggestion sent shockwaves through the assembly that were visible in the form of energy discharges, color changes, and harmonic frequencies that created a cacophony of alien surprise. The idea of true unity between galactic civilizations was revolutionary in scope. Most of these species had been competitors, rivals, or cautious allies for millennia. Impossible, Counselor Vorth stated firmly. Our species have fundamentally incompatible approaches to warfare, communication, and even basic logic. True coordination would be technically impossible. That's exactly what makes it unpredictable, Alex countered. The Devourers have been studying individual species and their typical alliance patterns. They haven't been studying what happens when species integrate their capabilities in ways that violate every assumption about how galactic civilizations operate. Alex activated a complex simulation that demonstrated his proposal. What if Corvin, crystal matrix technology, were integrated with Centauri biological systems? What if ethereal dimensional manipulation were coordinated with machine collective computational networks? What if telepathic species provided real-time mental coordination for non-telepathic assault forces? The simulation showed battle scenarios that defied conventional understanding of galactic warfare, ships that existed partially in subspace, while maintaining material weapons systems, biological weapons guided by crystalline intelligence networks that operated faster than light, coordinated attacks that required no communication delays because telepathic commanders were directly linked to artificial intelligence systems that could process information at speeds no organic brain could match. These technological combinations have never been attempted, High Consul Theron observed, his mental emanations indicating both fascination and concern. The technical challenges would be beyond any individual species' capabilities. Exactly, Alex agreed. We're not talking about one species trying to master alien technologies. We're talking about species working together in their areas of natural expertise to create something that has never existed before. Admiral Knox, who had been observing from the diplomatic gallery, stepped forward to address the council. The Strategic Assessment Division has run preliminary models on integrated combat systems. The results exceed our most optimistic projections. More importantly, the tactical approaches generated by these integrated systems are completely unpredictable by any known analytical method. Counselor Zeth's mechanical form reconfigured into new patterns as she processed this information. The computational requirements for such integration would exceed any individual species' technological capabilities, which is why we don't rely on individual capabilities, Alex replied. We use all of them together. Corvin crystal networks provide the processing hardware. Machine collective systems provide the software architecture. Telepathic species provide instantaneous coordination across any distance. Energy beings provide power distribution that bypasses normal physical limitations. And humans, he paused. Humans provide the unpredictable variables that make the entire system impossible to analyze or counter. What makes you believe humans are uniquely qualified for this role? Asked Counselor Vorth, his tone carrying centuries of skepticism about younger species making grand claims. Alex smiled with the confidence that had served him well since his first day at the academy. Because every other species in this chamber has spent millions of years becoming incredibly good at specific things. Corvin are masters of crystal technology. Centauri excel at biological systems. Telepaths have perfected mental communication. Machines have achieved perfect logical processing. Humans have spent their entire evolutionary history learning to improvise solutions when everything else fails. The chamber buzzed with discussion as representatives conferred among themselves through various communication methods. What Alex was proposing wasn't simply a new military strategy. It was a fundamental transformation of how galactic civilization operated. High Consul Theron spoke for the assembly after several minutes of consultation. You propose that we abandon our individual technological advantages to create something unprecedented. I propose that we combine our individual advantages to create something the Devourers cannot predict, analyze, or counter, Alex corrected. They've been treating us as separate problems to solve. What if we became one problem that doesn't have a solution because it changes faster than they can understand it? The voting process took nearly 8 hours. Representatives consulted with their home governments, analyzed technical specifications, and debated implications that would affect their civilizations for generations. When the final vote was tallied, the measure passed by the narrowest margin in Galactic Council history. 51% in favor, 49% abstaining, and 0% opposed. Even the most skeptical counselors acknowledged that conventional approaches had failed completely. As the assembly dispersed to begin the unprecedented task of technological and military integration, Admiral Knox approached Alex privately in the diplomatic gallery. "You realize what you've accomplished here?" she said quietly, her 4 arms moving in gestures that indicated deep respect in Xantharian culture. "You've convinced the galaxy's most ancient civilizations to abandon millions of years of established doctrine to attempt something completely experimental." Alex nodded, watching various representatives already forming preliminary working groups to discuss integration possibilities. "I know. But I also know something that gives me confidence." "Which is?" "The Devourers made one critical mistake in their analysis," Alex said, observing the unprecedented cooperation beginning to develop between species that had been rivals for millennia. They assumed that because humans were young and technologically primitive, we couldn't teach the galaxy anything it didn't already know. Admiral Knox's arms moved in the Xantharian equivalent of laughter. "And you're about to prove that assumption catastrophically wrong." "We're all about to prove it wrong," Alex corrected, "because for the first time in galactic history, we're not fighting as separate species trying to coordinate our efforts. We're fighting as one galaxy that happens to think in dozens of different ways simultaneously." As Alex watched ancient enemies and cautious allies beginning to work together on technologies and strategies that had never been conceived before, he reflected on the journey from that simple combination lock in Commander Wraith's classroom to this moment. The fundamental principle remained the same. Sometimes the best solution wasn't the most logical or sophisticated one, but simply the one that nobody would expect. Now they were about to find out if an entire galaxy could learn to be as unpredictable as a human with a problem to solve. The integrated fleet that assembled at the edge of galactic space defied every principle of military engineering that had guided civilization for millions of years. Ships that flickered in and out of visible reality floated alongside vessels that seemed to be grown rather than built. Crystalline formations that pulsed with inner light coordinated with mechanical constructs that moved with perfect precision, while beings of pure energy flowed between different craft like living lightning, connecting disparate technologies into something unprecedented. Alex stood in the command center of Unity Station, the hastily constructed coordination facility that served as the brain of their impossible alliance. The station itself was a marvel of integrated technology. Corvin crystal matrices provided processing power beyond anything previously imagined, while Centauri biological systems adapted and evolved the infrastructure in real time. Machine collective networks coordinated information flow, and telepathic links eliminated communication, delays across the vast distances of space. Main Devourer force detected at the galactic perimeter. reported Captain Nina, whose role as human coordinator for integrated communications made her one of the most important officers in the fleet. Long-range sensors indicate over 12,000 vessels, including ship classifications we've never encountered before. The strategic display updated to show the massive force emerging from intergalactic space. Where their advanced scouts had numbered in the hundreds, this armada represented an entire civilization dedicated to conquest. Their ships were larger, more sophisticated, and arranged in formations that suggested they had learned from every engagement their scouts had fought. Admiral Knox commanded the unified fleet from her position aboard the hybrid vessel Synthesis, whose very existence proved that impossible integration could work. Her 4 arms coordinated with systems that combined organic neural networks, crystal processing matrices, and quantum computing cores that operated faster than light itself. "Intelligence analysis confirms our worst fears," Admiral Knox announced, through the integrated communication system. The main Devourer force has adapted their approach based on scout reports. They're deploying countermeasures for every tactic we used against their advance elements. The tactical data was sobering. The Devourers weren't approaching with the aggressive confidence their scouts had shown. Instead, they moved with methodical caution, clearly expecting the kind of coordinated resistance that had defeated their preliminary forces. Their formations were perfect counters to every strategy the galaxy had used successfully over the past months. "They've learned," observed Commander Wraith, his crystalline form now interfaced directly with both organic and artificial intelligence networks in ways that would have been impossible without integrated technology. "They're approaching this as a conventional galactic conflict with prepared responses for our recent innovations." Alex studied the enemy formation patterns, noting something that bothered him about their perfect tactical arrangements. "They're not just adapted, they're over-adapted. Look at their deployment. Every formation is a textbook counter to tactics we used 3 months ago." "Is that not advantageous for them?" asked Veltar, the ethereal coordinator whose consciousness flickered between multiple dimensions as she managed the fleet's phase shift capabilities. "It should be," Alex replied slowly. "But they're countering tactics we used against their scouts. They haven't accounted for what we've become since then." Admiral Knox's 4 arms paused in their complex coordination dance. "Explain your assessment." Alex manipulated the tactical display to overlay the Devourer formation with their current integrated fleet capabilities. They studied our responses to their scout forces, but those responses came from individual species using their own technologies and working together through normal alliance structures. They're preparing to fight the Centauri Republic, the Machine Collective, the Corvin Alliance, and all the others as separate entities that coordinate with each other. But we are no longer separate entities coordinating, the Machine Collective representative observed, through integrated communication systems that combined artificial and organic intelligence. "Exactly," Alex said, his excitement growing as he saw the full implications. "They've spent months learning to predict how individual galactic species behave. They've developed counters for Corvin tactics, Centauri biological warfare, Machine Collective logical strategies, and human unpredictability. But they've never seen anything like what we've become." The truth of his observation became clear as the tactical analysis updated. The integrated fleet represented something that had never existed in galactic history. A force that combined incompatible technologies and contradictory tactical philosophies into approaches that defied analysis. "Devourer forces are beginning their attack approach," Captain Nina reported. "They're maintaining perfect formation discipline and deploying countermeasures for every known galactic military doctrine." Alex watched the enemy advance with growing confidence. Let them come. They're fighting the galaxy they studied, not the galaxy we've become. The battle began exactly as the Devourers expected. The integrated fleet's initial response followed patterns they recognized. energy weapon exchanges at long range, defensive formations designed to protect key vessels, and communication patterns that suggested traditional command structures. For the first hour of engagement, everything proceeded according to their analyzed predictions. Then the integration began to show its true potential. Ships that had been operating independently suddenly began phase shifting through dimensions while maintaining material weapons fire. Biological systems adapted to enemy tactics in real time, evolving countermeasures faster than the Devourers could analyze them. Crystal processing networks coordinated attacks across multiple time streams simultaneously, making their strategy unpredictable, even to themselves. Enemy formation discipline is breaking down, Nina reported with barely contained excitement. They're trying to counter tactics that don't follow any recognizable pattern. Alex nodded grimly. They prepared for everything we might do based on how we think individually. They never considered what we might do when we think collectively. The battle evolved into something unprecedented in galactic military history. The integrated fleet fought with capabilities that emerged from their combination rather than from any individual species' abilities. Attacks materialized from dimensional spaces that didn't exist in normal reality. Defensive systems adapted faster than biological evolution should allow. Coordination occurred at speeds that exceeded light itself through telepathic networks enhanced by artificial intelligence. Devourer command structure is fragmenting, Nina announced. They're reverting to individual ship actions instead of coordinated fleet movements. Alex felt a grim satisfaction as he watched the enemy's careful preparations dissolve into chaos. They built their entire strategy around predicting galactic behavior based on millions of years of historical data. But we're not following historical patterns anymore. The tide of battle shifted decisively as the Devourers realized their fundamental miscalculation. They had prepared to fight the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy using those civilizations, established strengths and predictable weaknesses. Instead, they faced something that combined all those strengths while creating entirely new capabilities that had never existed before. Enemy forces are beginning general withdrawal, Nina reported. Multiple Devourer vessels are requesting communication channels. Admiral Knox's response was immediate. Denied. We pursue until complete victory is achieved. The integrated fleet pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency. Ships that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously hunted fleeing Devourers through spaces they couldn't access. Biological weapons evolved to counter every defensive measure the enemy attempted. Crystal networks processed tactical information faster than the Devourers could adapt to changing circumstances. Final enemy vessel has been destroyed or captured, Nina announced 8 hours after the battle began. Complete victory achieved. The celebration that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Species that had been rivals for millennia embraced as allies. Technologies that had been carefully guarded secrets were shared freely. The impossible had become reality through cooperation that transcended everything they thought they knew about galactic civilization. Admiral Knox approached Alex privately as the celebration continued around them. "You realize what this means?" she said quietly. "We didn't just defeat an invasion force. We discovered that the galaxy is capable of becoming something greater than the sum of its parts." Alex nodded, watching representatives from dozens of species working together on technologies that none of them could have imagined alone. The Devourers thought they could predict us because they understood our individual patterns. They never considered that we might create entirely new patterns by working together. And you made it possible by convincing us to abandon everything. We thought we knew about warfare. Alex smiled as he reflected on the journey from that first combination lock to this moment of unprecedented galactic unity. "I just did what humans do best when faced with impossible problems, which is, I found a way to turn the lock into something completely different," Alex replied. The Devourers thought they were facing a collection of separate species they could defeat individually. Instead, They discovered that sometimes the best solution to any problem is to change the fundamental nature of the problem itself. As reports flowed in from across the galaxy confirming the complete defeat of the Devourer invasion, Alex realized that they had accomplished something far greater than military victory. They had proven that impossible cooperation could create impossible results. The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time since humanity had joined the galactic community, Alex felt truly confident that it would be better.